This video will take you through the question, to what extent was the Nazi takeover of power from the 30th of January 1933 to 30th of January 1934 a legal revolution? It'll consist of effectively two parts. The first part will look at the how to analyse the question and how to deconstruct it and create a plan from it. And then the second part will actually take you through the content of the plan. Okay, so first of all, the question analysis. Always, crucially, always make sure that you note the dates. It's from the 30th of January 1933. Immediately, you'll know from that is the date when Hitler became Chancellor, and it goes up to the 30th of January 1934. Reason for that: one, it's the first anniversary of Hitler becoming Chancellor. Secondly, again, if your knowledge is secure, you would know that is the date when Hitler issued a law called the Law for the Reconstruction of the Reich. More of which later. So why am I drawing your attention to that? Usually in A-level you're given a date range. You need to use the full date range. There is a reason they've given you the dates. When you write your introduction, that's a good opportunity to show awareness of that. So in my introduction, I would have made a comment of exactly the point I've just given to you. Okay, so how do you plan? A few sort of pointers just to start off. In the final exam, the process of planning an answer has to happen in about 2 minutes. It happens in your head. Yes, you do need to quickly jot down just a few words. Before you start writing your answer, you do need to have a clear sense of how many paragraphs will make up the answer so that you can control the timing. But you obviously don't have much time. You've got to get into writing your answer as quickly as possible, but there's no point in writing an answer until you've got a clear sense of a plan. But what I'm saying is, in the exam, you do the planning largely in your head. But that process of it's like anything else. It's like learning to ride a bike, learning to swim. Planning an answer in 2 minutes in your head can only happen with a lot of hard work and practice over a long period of time. And that hard work and practice takes time. So over the course of a 2-year A-level, when you're sitting down to plan an answer, you don't do it in 2 minutes. This is this is not in the final exam here. When you're at home or when you're working on this, the planning process could take 1 or 2 hours, and it will get quicker the more you practice, like anything else. But you should certainly be thinking of at least an hour on the planning process. Okay, so what do you do when you plan? You start off, well, no, the first thing you don't do is you do not plan from your notes. Never have your notes in front of you, because you then get distracted from the detail. You've got to get the detail in your head. So whatever the question is about, read your notes, try to remember the notes on that particular topic, and then put your notes to one side, get your folder out of the way, and get a blank piece of paper in front of you and write the question on the top of the piece of paper, a bit like the way you're looking at here, and then you plan to the question. You do not plan from your notes. Plan to the question. You plan by looking at the question and thinking about what the question tells you. So I'm going to demonstrate that process now. So you've started off, you've already identified the date range. Okay, so that's important because you obviously don't want to stray into irrelevance. So notice, therefore, you're not going to get any credit if you start talking about the Night of the Long Knives, because that happened in June 1934. Okay, so there are two smaller questions that sit inside that larger one. That's the first thing that you need to be aware of. The first is, to what extent was the Nazi takeover of power a revolution? So you're focusing in on the word revolution. Then there's a second question. To what extent was that revolution legal? So you're focusing in on there. So immediately you've identified there's going to be, in a sense, two halves to your essay. You've got 45 minutes to write an answer. There's going to be two halves to it. Now, clearly, you can't write an essay of 2 paragraphs at A level. You've really got to be thinking of sort of 5 or 6 main building blocks that will constitute the answer. Where do we take this now? Okay, so you've got 2 halves to it. So I've just moved on to a different screen there. You'll notice there are the 2 halves we just identified. Okay, so we take the first half. To what extent was the Nazi takeover of power a revolution? Well, the question contains the phrase, to what extent? And most A-level questions will have that phrase, or might say how far. If it said describe, then all you have to do is talk about the takeover of power, okay? But if a question says to what extent or how far, you're being asked to measure. You're being asked to look at arguments for and against, to balance. So immediately you think, well, I'll take that statement, the Nazi takeover of power being a revolution, and you can then split it into 2 halves. And the 2 halves are, first of all, the takeover of power was a revolution. It was a revolution. And the second, the revolution was incomplete. Okay, in other words, the counter-argument that it was not a full revolution. Okay, so you've split the argument. You're saying, yes, in many ways it was a revolution, and in other ways it could be argued it wasn't a revolution. Okay, now at this particular point, this is why you've got to have your knowledge inside your head. You've got to know stuff, and you can now start to build a little bit of your own knowledge, okay, on a basic level. The takeover of power was a revolution, okay. Well, what does that word revolution mean? Okay, well, a revolution means a significant break with the past. So what you've just done there is you constructed a topic sentence, okay, the beginning of a paragraph. The takeover of power was a revolution because the takeover was a significant break with the past. We'll just leave that for the moment like that. Then you've got the flip side of it. The revolution was incomplete. Again, apply your own knowledge. Okay, you're an A-level historian. What is the word we use for when there is not a break with the past? Then what has been happening in the past just simply carries on. In other words, the opposite of revolution. Okay, well, the word is continuity. Okay, that's an important historical word. So let's put that into the topic sentence. The revolution was incomplete because Hitler wanted to maintain continuity with the past. So what we've done there is we've created a couple of pretty strong topic sentences. Okay, and we've done that really without even looking at your notes. You've done that simply by looking at the question. So we then go to the other, the second half that we identified earlier, the issue of legality. So you identified from the question you need to talk about legality. To what extent was this revolution legal? So again, exactly the same process. You can now split that into 2 halves. Okay, so the first half is you're going to effectively agree with it and say, yeah, it was legal. So let's make a decent topic sentence out of it. So again, you apply a little bit of knowledge. You've got to know this, okay? So you know that Hitler wanted the revolution, wanted the changes that he was introducing to appear legal. So therefore, Hitler's intent on maintaining the appearance of legality throughout that whole takeover process. What's the opposite argument? Let's find a way of wording the opposite argument. Okay, well, again, you take your own knowledge, you think about what you know in broad terms, and you know that it was on the edge of illegality, okay, that it could be argued to be an illegal takeover, because although Hitler may have followed the letter of the law, he often did not follow the spirit of the law, and arguably he didn't even follow the letter of the law in particular cases. So what you've managed to do there, just by looking at the question and applying your broad knowledge, is you've created there 4 topic sentences. 4 topic sentences. Pretty good start. Now you know, whatever happens, that your answer is going to consist of at least 4 strong paragraphs. Okay, so you're pretty much tempted now to think, okay, I've got a gist of it. I can now go in and start writing an answer to it. I would say at this particular stage, be a little bit cautious. Okay, there are our sentences. Okay, we've got our 4 topic sentences. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Think at this stage about what you know. Are there any obvious missing areas? Okay, are there anything obviously missing? Just pull back. Okay, with the expression "see the wood for the trees." Okay, you don't get too. This is why you mustn't get too bogged into the detail. Have a quick look at what you've got so far. So we've identified 4 topic areas, and thinking about it, I'm thinking, well, that word revolution, okay, revolution isn't just about a significant break with the past. A revolution is about the way you bring about change as well. Okay, there's different types of revolution, and one of the ways you can define revolution is the use of violence to bring about change. And yes, I know the Nazis did use a lot of violence in the first year of Hitler's chancellorship. So I'm going to add another topic sentence there. I'm going to put it at the beginning. The takeover of power was a revolution because the Nazis used political violence throughout the whole process. Okay, that's my first topic sentence. Then my next one, it was a revolution because it broke with the past. Then I'm looking at the counter argument. It was incomplete because Hitler wanted to maintain continuity with the past. Then I move into the legality bit. Hitler was intent on maintaining the appearance of legality, and then I move into the counter-argument about illegality. The takeover bordered on the edge of illegality. So I'm pretty happy now. I've constructed a basic plan that really addresses that question. Okay, it's not going to take me into a narrative, into a description. It doesn't really start on the 30th of January 33 and then work its way through up to the 30th of January 1934, which could potentially trap you into writing a descriptive, a narrative account. Okay, so if I use these as my building blocks and now construct a paragraph out of each. Okay, anything else to do? Actually, there is. Take those topic sentences. Now, again, in the exam, you just do this in your head. Okay, but I've used the phrase smooth out those rough edges. Okay, what you need to do is you need to get a line of argument. You need to get smooth transition from one paragraph to the next so that the ideas flow from one to the other. Okay, so I've taken those same five topic sentences, and all I've done here is I've added the occasional word. I've put in a little phrase here and there so that they move from one to the next. So the first topic sentence is fine. There isn't a need for transition there because it is the first topic sentence. Okay, and I'll develop that into a paragraph. And then when I move into the second paragraph, all I've done is put that word also. Okay, so the takeover of power was also a revolution. Okay, because in the first paragraph I've given one reason it was a revolution because of the use of violence, and now I'm going to give another reason it was a revolution because it significantly broke with the past. That word also creates a connection with the paragraph that went before. Okay, and then you move into paragraph 3, and I've added the one about the revolution was incomplete because of continuity. So I'm turning into a counter-argument here. Now, there's various phrases you can use. You can say, on the other hand, to some extent, there is a different view, and so on and so forth. But again, the principle is you need to link it with the paragraph before. Now, in the paragraph before, you've spoken about the significant break with the past. So notice what I've done here at the beginning of this one is I've linked, in spite of that significant break with the Weimar Republic, the revolution was incomplete. So I've linked that to that. And then I've tagged a little bit extra on the end in order to maintain conservative support for the Nazi regime. So I've given the reason why Hitler wanted to maintain continuity with the past. I put the reason in, and then that links to my next topic sentence, because at the beginning of the next topic sentence, I've just tagged in a little bit more. So you've got the original topic sentence there in black font, but I put in that the Conservatives would only back Hitler if he followed the letter of the law. And so Hitler was intent on maintaining the appearance of legality. So the issue about the Conservatives and their attitudes to the regime is the linking factor between paragraphs 3 and 4. And then you move on to paragraph 5, which is about the counter-argument that the revolution was borderline illegality. You want to link it to paragraph 4, which is about Hitler maintaining the appearance. So I've just put in that little phrase at the beginning. Hitler may have followed the letter of the law, but he didn't follow the spirit of the law. So that extra bit at the beginning has linked to there. So you're just playing with the wording here. And this is why it is so important at A level. You've got to write in an academic way. You've got to write well, and you can learn this the way I've just taught you this now, but the best way to learn this is to read historians write and to think as you read, to think about, as you read good historians, they construct their accounts into paragraphs. Think about how they are constructing their paragraphs. Think about their topic sentences, and you will see that they do the same thing. And the more you read, the better you will become at this, because you've got to get to a stage after 2 years of doing A-level where all of this can pretty much happen instantly as you write. Okay, so you now have 5 strong topic sentences. The outline of a strong answer is starting to emerge. So you've pretty much identified you've got 5 main building blocks, in addition to the introduction and the conclusion that sit at the beginning and the end. So you pretty much now know you're going to be writing a 7-paragraph answer. Okay, so let's look at those 5 main building blocks. Okay, and how are you going to? What you've now got to do is you've got to develop each of them into a paragraph, and that's where you apply precise additional supporting knowledge. And I really emphasize that word precise. Okay, this is where you've got to bring in your knowledge, okay, to support the topic sentence, to develop it, okay, to explain the point you're trying to make. So again, this is the process that in the exam happens in your head, but at home, I would do something like this. I would do a grid. I would take my 5 topic sentences, and then I would leave a gap in between each one. Okay, and what you then want to do in those gaps is you want to fill those gaps with information. But you've got to be very mindful of the fact we've just said 7 paragraphs: introduction, 5 paragraphs, conclusion. Let's say 45 minutes to do this. Knock off 2 or 3 minutes to plan. That leaves 42 minutes. 7 paragraphs, that's 6 minutes per paragraph. Okay, so you could potentially fill that gap with loads and loads of knowledge, but you've only got 6 minutes, okay, to write that point. So be selective. Okay, think of what are the key points I want to put down. Okay, you can't put down everything. What are the key points? Okay, but you've got a framework that's going to control the way you pace and write your answer now. This is why you've got to have an analytical plan before you start. Otherwise, you just fall into the trap of telling the story of what happens, and in 45 minutes, you end up writing an unstructured narrative that doesn't really focus on the question, and almost certainly you'll run out of time. After 45 minutes, you've only got as far as the Enabling Act of 1933, and you haven't even got anywhere near the end of the time parameters of the question. Okay, so there's the principle there. So what we'll do now is I'm going to just take you through each of those paragraphs and the contents. This is now very much the content. We've got our topic sentence. What would be the material I would put in to write this particular answer? Okay, so building block one. Okay, so this is the argument that you're focusing here on that word revolution. Let's forget the legality bit for the moment. This paragraph is about, was it a revolution? And this paragraph is, it's say you're arguing a point that it was a revolution. It was a revolution. And you're saying it's because the Nazis used political violence. So what examples? What are the key examples that you would give? Okay, well, obviously, I would say the National Uprising election campaign. Now, put the dates in. That's February up to the 5th of March, because the elections were the 5th of March. It was a 6-week period. We know there was a huge amount of Nazi violence against the Communists and Social Democrats, making it very, very difficult for them to campaign in those elections. Why was there a lot of violence? The SA, 50,000 of them, were deputised to the Prussian police, auxiliary police, effectively like turning thugs into giving them the power of police. A second example, on the 23rd of March 1933, when the Rostov deputies gathered to vote for the Enabling Act, that was not a normal vote. Okay, there was political violence there because the inside of the chamber was lined by SA thugs, and that intimidated the voters. Now, obviously, the Nazis were going to vote for it anyway. Arguably, the DNVP, Hitler's coalition partners, were going to vote for the Enabling Party, Enabling Act anyway. We do know that the communists could not attend. For the reasons we've already said, that they had been identified as enemies of the state and were being hunted out as a result of the Rostov fire decree. The Social Democratic Party did attend, and we know that as a matter of absolute principle, they were ideologically opposed to the Nazis. They did not vote, but caught in the middle with the Centre Party, and in particular it was the Centre Party who were intimidated by the presence of the SA. They knew that they were family men. They felt their families were at risk. They would be identified as voting against the Enabling Act, and their families could be at risk as well as themselves being arrested. So we know that they, to a large extent, convinced themselves that that Hitler was doing good. They were caught in the middle. They weren't quite sure. Many of them genuinely believed that Germany needed a strong leader at this point. And the presence of the SA in the chamber had certainly convinced many of them it was probably best just to go along and vote for it, which is pretty much what happened. Okay, so the Enabling Act was passed. So therefore, violence is that, that's a revolutionary act, intimidating a parliament to vote for a law. And it's also arguably, well, almost definitely it is an illegal act, but you can mention that later on when you get onto that particular point. This is about the issue. This is about revolution. Okay. Moving on, we know that there was violence against trade union leaders. Okay, that the 2nd of May 1933, the SA stormed the trade union officers, arrested trade union leaders, and put them into concentration camps. And then that key one about the town hall revolutions. Okay, that was part of the coordination of the state structure, where Hitler sent the stormtroopers into the different regions of Germany, the different states, sent them away from Berlin, and they were given orders to create violence, in particular violence against communists, so that Hitler could justify using the powers that he now had with the Rostov fire decree to take over the power of the states. And so often the SA would dress up as communists and they would fight each other, but that would create an excuse for Hitler to say, right, I am stepping in, I am taking over the power of the states. And that's when, of course, he appointed Reich governors, who were the Nazi Gauleiters. So the Reichsstatthalter, as they were called. Now, I've obviously added little details into my account there, which, it literally comes down to, you've got 6 minutes to write something down here. Some people write faster than others. You've got to get precise information in, but depending on how fast you write, depends on how much you can get in. So I'm not saying the words that you're looking at there are all you put in. If you can write faster than that, you get in additional details, but you keep it focused on political violence. Moving on. Next paragraph then. Takeover of power was also a revolution. This is because of the break with the past. Okay, breaking with the past. Okay, so yes, in this you've got to be talking about the past. You've got to be talking about the Weimar Republic, 1919 to 32. And if necessary, you've got to talk about the Second Reich, 1871 to 1918. Okay, did Hitler break with the past? Were the events of 1933 significantly moving Germany into a different direction? So I've put down 4 points. Okay, I think the Rostov fire decree. Okay, you don't just tell me what that was. You've got to kind of like talk about it in relation to the question. So, of course, we know that it was passed the day after the Rostov fire. We know the full title was the Decree for the Protection of People and State, signed by Hindenburg, which the Weimar Constitution allowed him to do using Article 48. What did the Weimar Fire Decree do? Article 1, it consisted of 2 articles, remember. In the first article, Hindenburg now authorised Hitler to take emergency control, which literally meant the Weimar Bill of Rights was suspended. The guarantees that the Constitution had given Germans to be free from arrest without trial, freedom of speech. Now Hitler temporarily, while there was a state of emergency, could suspend those guarantees. Okay, well, that's a significant break with the past. Okay, basic human rights now being suspended. So you can certainly create an argument that that was a revolutionary event. Moving on, the enabling law ended democracy. We can now see that marked the end of democracy. Well, that's a pretty significant shift from the past. Okay, the Weimar Republic had been a model democracy, even going back to the Second Reich, 1871 to 1918. Although it was authoritarian, laws could not be passed without the Reichstag. Okay, yes, there were various manipulations going on, but nevertheless, the Second Reich was a democracy. Now, Hitler can pass laws without the Reichstag. Okay, a revolution. 2nd of May 1933, trade unions. Again, trade unions, ever since the birth of the social democracy in the 1860s and 1870s, they had campaigned in Bismarck's Germany for trade unions to have rights. Those rights had become enshrined. Later on in the Second Reich, and certainly in the Weimar Republic, they were enshrined within the Constitution, the rights for bargaining between employers and employees. Now all of that went, okay, gone. Workers do not have any rights face to face with employers. That trade unions were crushed. A revolution. Next one, this issue of federalism, so important. It had been enshrined in both those constitutions, the 1871 Constitution and the 1919 Constitution, destroyed on the 31st of March 33. That was stage 1. That was the law for the coordination of the states, the Länder, and which created Reich governors to go in and take over, take powers from the state governments. And then the process fully completed on the first anniversary of Hitler becoming Chancellor with the law for the reconstruction of the Reich. So what you've done here is you've constructed an argument to say that there was a significant break with the past. Okay, there is a counter argument. Okay, but but that's what we've now got to move into. Okay, you're separating it out. Okay. So here we are, we're looking at the counter-argument to that. Okay, we're turning it around and we're saying, well, okay, but that's a little bit simplistic. Although you can argue there was a complete break with the past, in many ways, Hitler wanted to maintain continuity with the past. That's the key word, continuity. So there's quite a lot you can talk about here. You've only got 6 minutes. You've got to rattle through a few examples fairly quickly. I think the day of Potsdam is a really crucial one. 2 days before the Enabling Act vote, of course, that famous day, that ceremony, where Hitler very much played the conservative. A brilliant propaganda message being put across that Hitler was a reactionary, not a revolutionary, that he wanted to restore the values of the past. The other really obvious one is Hitler's speech to the Gauleiters, 6th of July 1933, where he made that very famous speech that revolution should not be a permanent state, that revolution must now move close, it must now move to evolution. So he's saying there has been a revolution, but it must now move towards evolution. We must not break with everything. We must maintain continuity so that we have law and order. So that's clearly an absolutely central point, and it's got to go into this paragraph. We know that Hitler maintained many of the institutions of the Weimar Republic, okay, that he kept the existing army. He didn't abolish the ministries. Even though the Reichstag was no longer necessary to pass laws, he still kept it. Every 30th of January, Hitler went and gave a speech. There's only one party in there, the Nazi Party, but nevertheless, he kept it as an institution because he wanted to maintain the illusion that the past was still there, because that's about appealing to, in particular, the middle-class Germans, that there was continuity, that there was law and order, that it was too unsettling to have a complete break with the past. It wasn't just the fact that he kept the key institutions, but he also, the staffing of the institutions to a large extent was unchanged. So he didn't kick out people who were doing a good job and replace them with Nazis just because he wanted all these institutions to be Nazified. Hitler would only allow a takeover to a point. He needed people to carry on doing their jobs. So to a large extent, people kept their jobs even though they were not members of the Nazi Party. So we're talking here about the machinery of running the country, and always think of those four elements: the army, the police, the civil service, and the judiciary. Synoptically, it's always good, in fact necessary at A-level, to sort of show breadth of knowledge and understanding. That was in real sharp contrast to Russia, that had a revolution in 1917. And the revolution in Russia was a much more complete revolution, that those institutions that we just mentioned, the army, the police, were abolished and were replaced by communist versions. But that uncertainty plunged Russia into civil war and chaos for many years. And although the civil war ended in 1921, Russia arguably never recovered from that shock. And Hitler knew of those events, and he was very anxious to avoid the crisis that Russia had gone through with their revolution, which is one of the reasons he wanted to maintain continuity. And then there's another one. It could also be argued that democracy didn't suddenly end when Hitler came to power in 1933 with the Enabling Act. Actually, from your knowledge, you know that way back in 1930, the year after the Great Depression started, von Brüning had been appointed Chancellor, and he had used or possibly abused Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution. Remember, Article 48 of the Constitution said that if the Parliament is hung, if the laws cannot be passed because of the Constitution of the Parliament, then Chancellors can get laws passed by getting the President to sign them off, using Article 48 of the 1919 Constitution. And that was legally correct. Brüning arguably abused that because he made lawmaking using Article 48, which bypassed the Reichstag. He made that the norm for the 2 years that he was Chancellor. And then von Papen, who became Chancellor for 6 months after that in 1932, did the same. And although Schleicher was only around for about less than 2 months as Chancellor, he did the same. So really, when Hitler became Chancellor in January 1933, for the best part since the autumn of 1932, democracy had not really been functioning. Lawmaking had been happening by being signed off by the president. So arguably, Hitler didn't end democracy. Arguably, democracy had ended before Hitler. So arguably, therefore, what Hitler did was not a revolution. He was simply continuing with what had been happening before. So there is that issue of continuity with the past. So it's a relevant point for this particular paragraph. Our fourth paragraph then. Now, in paragraphs 4 and 5, we're moving into the counter-argument not the counter-argument, we're moving into the second half. We're focusing in on that issue of legality. So I think we've done a pretty good job so far about debating whether the Nazi takeover of power was a revolution, but now we've got to focus in on the legality bit in the second half. And remember, you split this down into two halves. Okay, so the first half of the legality bit is arguing that yes, it was legal in some ways. Okay, so you've got our topic sentence that we worked out earlier, that you could certainly argue that Hitler followed the letter of the law. He maintained the appearance of legality, and your topic sentence neatly builds into that the issue of the reason why. Hitler knew that he needed the backing of the very, very experienced men who had been running the country since 1871. The Conservatives, a huge amount of experience. He doesn't want to just boot them out because he doesn't like them. He wants Nazis to run the country. He needs to use them, get them running the country for him. And as we know, Hitler was a master of that. He is partly doing that by playing the act that he is working for them, whereas in fact they don't realise it, but they're working for him. So the issue of legality is central because the Conservatives are very legally minded people. Okay, they believe in the rule of law, and Hitler had learned that lesson way back in 1923, that if he attempts to seize power by using violence, as he did with the beer hall putsch, that would unsettle these men who are running the country, even though they sympathise with Hitler's values. And of course, in 1923, they stopped him. They stood in his way. So there's our first point. Lessons learned. Okay, Hitler had learned that he needed to maintain the appearance of legality, and he learned it from the beer hall putsch. Okay, and so we move into 1933. We move into the events, and we can see Hitler bending over backwards at every move to try to show his conservative partners who've put him into power, and Hitler needs them, certainly for a few years. He's bending over backwards to convince them this is legal. I am doing it legally. Okay, so the Rostov Fire Decree. Now there's the full title: the Decree for the Protection of People and State was justified using Article 48 of the 1919 Constitution. Okay, it was on the surface legal. Okay, it was passed legally. The Constitution said that a president, if it was a chancellor, head of government, if there was a state of emergency, and Hitler claimed there was a state of emergency because the Reichstag fire, he claimed, was a signal of a communist attempt to take over of power, that the Constitution said if there's a state of emergency, the head of government, the chancellor, can go to the president, and the president can sign off laws using presidential signature. And so Hitler did. On that night, he went, gave the president a proposed law that Hitler have emergency powers, and President Hindenburg signed it. On the surface, legal. The other one, which I've really emphasised in my lessons, is that event 6 months before Hitler became Chancellor. Von Papen, who was Chancellor at that time, used Article 48 to get President Hindenburg to sign off an order, a decree, for von Papen effectively to remove Social Democrats from the Prussian state government, using the same pretext. It was kind of like an early version of the conversation that Hitler had on the 27th of February 1933, on the night of the Rostov fire. And back on the 20th of July 1932, Hindenburg had authorised von Papen to do that. So that then created that precedent, okay? A legal precedent had been established. Because von Papen had done this, then Hitler was able to justify, to Hindenburg, you need to allow me to have the same powers because we have another emergency now with the Rostov fire. So the past was used to justify the passing of that decree for the protection of people and state, the Rostov fire decree. The Enabling Act, a month later, on the 23rd of March, it was voted on and then became law the next day on the 24th of March, likewise followed the rules of the Weimar Constitution. Hitler, the Enabling Act authorised Hitler, it gave Hitler the power for 4 years to pass laws by himself without having to go to the Reichstag in future. The Weimar Constitution actually said that the Constitution could be changed. It needed a 2/3 majority, so Hitler worked hard to make sure that that he had that 2/3 majority. Now, arguably, in the next paragraph, you could argue that the way he did that was illegal, but nevertheless, he's maintaining the appearance of legality. There's a useful fact for you. The Weimar Constitution, we all know Article 48, or at least you should, but dig down deeper, it was Article 76 that stated a change of the Constitution required a special vote, not just a majority. It had to be a 2/3 majority, okay? Normal laws is a 50% majority, but this had to be a 2/3 majority. And then a crucial point that the Gleichschaltung that then followed, the coordination of the political parties, creating a one-party state, and the crushing of the trade unions, and in particular the takeover of the federal states. Although there was violence that was used, we've established that earlier on, the violence was used against the trade unions, the town hall revolutions. At every step, Hitler made sure a law was issued. And so he's doing that, he's directing a message to his conservative partners saying, look, I'm not breaking the law, okay? I am doing this legally. So make sure you include the dates and the names of the laws. So the coordination of the professional civil service, a law was issued, the law for the restoration of professional civil service on the 7th of April. The law for the coordination of the Länder, the states, on the 31st of March. That was the one that created the Reich governors. And then the completion of that process, the law for the reconstruction of the Reich a year after Hitler became Chancellor. The law against the formation of political parties, the 14th of July, was when Hitler formally announced that no new parties can be formed. And of course, by that stage, the existing parties had either been forcibly dissolved, the SPD and the Communists, or they had voluntarily dissolved themselves. So effectively, from that point onwards, it was a one-party state. But Hitler issued a law. And of course, all of those things, he was empowered legally to make laws by himself because of the Enabling Act. So all of those laws arose because of the Enabling Act. If the Enabling Act hadn't been passed, then those laws there could not have happened. Okay, so there's lots of joined up thinking here. The Enabling Act could only be passed, could not have been passed if there hadn't been the Decree for the Protection of People and State, because the Decree for the Protection of People and State allowed Hitler to arrest the communist members of the Reichstag, and therefore that was one of the means that Hitler was able to secure the majority for the vote. So, like I say, joined up thinking here, it all works together. And then the final point, okay, the counter-argument. Hitler may have followed the letter of the law, but he did not follow the spirit of the law. What are the key points? Here's some of them. There are others, but here are some of the key ones. Article 48, let's go back to this, 1919, Hugo Preuss's Constitution. Article 48, yes, it said that in a time of emergency, laws can be passed off by the president, by presidential signature. In other words, the Chancellor can bypass the Reichstag. Okay, that's not democratic. We know that's not democratic. The Reichstag should be used. But the purpose of Article 48 was actually to protect democracy against enemies to democracy. So the principle was that you get the president to sign a law if there's a threat to democracy. And Hebert, in particular in the early years of the Weimar Republic, used that very well because of threats such as Hitler himself, the Beer Hall Putsch, communist threats. There were times when when Hebert signed off Article 48 to protect the Weimar Republic as protecting democracy. Secondly, Article 48 was intended for presidential use only. It wasn't intended to be used by the Chancellor. And what Article 48, the Rostov Fire Decree did is effectively it gave powers to Hitler as head of government to decide the state of emergency. Well, the purpose of Article 48 was that what was the state of emergency should be decided by the president, but Hitler very carefully on that night, 27th of March, written into the Rostov Fire Decree in the small print was that it was the Chancellor who would decide when the state of emergency ended. And that was very much against the spirit of what Article 48 was about. So that's mentioned there, that Hitler manipulated Hindenburg into signing that decree. Pressure was put on him. It was signed without thought, and the decision as to when the decree would end was given to Hitler. And of course, Hitler never ended the decree. It stayed in existence for the next 12 years. The deputising of those 50,000 Nazi stormtroopers, arguably illegal, because what it did is it transformed the nature of policing. Policing is supposed to protect the rights of the individual, but what it did is it politicised the police. It turned them into an instrument of the Nazi Party. So the police now were not acting in the interests of civil liberties, they were now acting in the interests of the Nazi Party by, for example, making it difficult for the communists to campaign and so on. Next one, the Nazis used the pretense of legality as a thin mask for basically what were terroristic measures. Okay, this whole thing, I'm doing everything legally. Hitler was playing the game here. He was, there was no sincerity to what he was saying. He was maintaining an illusion, so it's worthwhile sort of repeating that. And then, of course, there's that key issue. There was always the underlying threat of violence. And I think Lee, who made the important point that nowadays, if laws are passed, if a law was passed with the threat of violence, intimidation, okay, if there was intimidation for a member of parliament to vote for a law, that would go to the courts, and the court would automatically then judge. The judges are completely independent from politics, and in a true democracy, the courts, the judges, would never allow violence to influence democratic process. It would then be judged to be illegal. But that vote on the Enabling Act, where the Centre Party were intimidated, is just one of many examples where there was underlying violence that was being used. By legal principles, that was illegal. Okay, but nobody was prepared to challenge it. Why not? Because the judges who were there in 1933, remember, the judges, the judiciary, were old Junker families. They were largely men from the days of the Second Reich who were biased. They were politically biased. Think back to 1923 when Hitler was put on trial. He was put before a court, and the judge only gave him a very lenient 9-month sentence for what should have been imprisonment for life. The judiciary of the Weimar Republic had never really been democratized. It was a biased judiciary. So nobody questioned the passing of the Enabling Act. Nobody questioned the fact that there was intimidation during the National Uprising election campaign, and so on. there's the answer. Now, there's a lot of detail there I've given into this video. You've got to manage the timing. Okay, you're like anyone else who does the exam. You've got the same amount of time, everybody in the country. There's always more you can put in. Some people write faster than others. Writing at speed and writing precisely at speed and legibly at speed is an important skill that you need for A-level. You can't get away from that fact, but you've got to manage your timing. You do need to include an introduction at the beginning and a conclusion at the end. I'm not going to go into the introductions and conclusions in this particular video, but you add those on. That means you're writing a 7-paragraph essay. You've got 45 minutes to write an answer. Take off 3 minutes to plan. Now remember, in the exam, that planning has to happen virtually instantly in your head. You do need to give yourself 2 or 3 minutes to think it through, but by the time you sit the final exam, you really have got to do that very quickly. But hopefully, if you've done all the thinking, as I've done in this video, at home over 2 years, and you've gone through lots and lots of essay questions, that by this stage you're becoming pretty skilled at it. That will leave you 42 minutes to write your answer. 7 paragraphs in 42 minutes equates to 6 minutes per paragraph. It doesn't have to be exactly 6 minutes for each paragraph. You may think you can write your introduction in 4 minutes, you can write your conclusion in 5 minutes, whatever. You work out the timing, get a quick sense of the timing, have the watch on the desk in front of you, note the time you start your answer and stick to the timing. Do not go over for each paragraph by paragraph. Keep your pen moving, get the timing accurate. That is absolutely crucial. That's the end of this video. Hopefully that was useful to you. Practice. I put now have a go. That's entirely up to you. But you've got a 2-year A-level course. It is about practice. The more you practice planning and writing answers, the better you will be, because you've got to get into that final examination where whatever question appears, you've pretty much practiced it already. It'll be slightly differently worded, but you will have done all the thinking and hopefully practicing of similar questions before you get into the final examination. Thank you very much.